Welcome back to Old School Sports and our OOTP 23 playthrough of the Pittsburgh Pirates. We are at the end of our first season as general manager of the Buccos, 72 and 90 record, which was actually a little bit better than expected. So we made a big improvement from last season. You can see improved from 55 wins to 72 wins. So that is a big step in the right direction. I'm going to take a look and review the season very briefly before kicking off the offseason. As we did talk about at the end of our last episode, finished 13th in the National League in runs scored, which was better than the last place the Pirates were in a year ago, but actually slipped back to 14th in runs allowed from 13th the year before. So although we made a little bit of progress with the team, not a ton, two things we want to try to focus on in the offseason. You can see we were worse than the league in defensive efficiency and zone rating, and also last in stolen bases, last in base running. So hopefully improving our team speed and team defense somewhat in the offseason will help us. We were close to a 500 team over the last 3.5+ months of the season, just that we got off to a real miserable start. So hopefully that's a sign that there are better days ahead for Pittsburgh as we begin this 2038-2039 offseason. I do continue to feel that pitching, particularly starting pitching, is a potential strength of this team. Marco Estrada, who we picked up in a trade with the Royals, 10-14 record, 5.44 ERA, but he did have a 3.52 BABIP this year. Still put up a 2.7 WAR, as his FIP was 4.10. So a pitcher who I think can be better than he's indicated. Certainly pitched much better in KC. You'll see when you look through our team, we had a lot of really high BABIPs against us. Probably in some ways attributable to our pretty mediocre defense, or our bad defense, quite honestly. So the hope is that if we shore up that defense, we'll get a little more out of some of these pitchers. Edgar Flores was on the IL for a good chunk of the year, but 4-1 record with a 3.38 ERA. He's a 25-year-old who's also an important part of our future, like Estrada. Ricky Gotti, 26-year-old starter, 10-14, 5.24 ERA, but still definitely profiles as someone who can be a useful major league starter. Heriberto Rosales, similar, 8-10 record for the 25-year-old, 5.12 ERA. Hope that we can get a little more out of him next year. And then Tony Santana, another relatively young pitcher with nice arsenal of pitches, pretty decent stuff, good personality. He led the team in wins, was 11-11 with a 4.16 ERA, put up a team best among the pitchers, 3.3 WAR, 3.48 Sierra. So with those four, and then also quite honestly with Omar Ganoa, who started a good chunk of the season for us. You can see 18 of his 38 appearances were starts. He put up a 3.77 ERA. Feel that we definitely have potential high quality, or at least a volume of quality major league starting pitchers on the roster right now. When we turn to the bullpen, things are a little more suspect. Willie Arenales is Rule 5 acquisition. Had him on the roster all season, 2-5 record, 5.15 ERA. You can see he still potentially has a little bit to improve as far as his stuff, his movement, and his cutter and his slider. He's durable, left-hander out of the pen. Hopefully he can be better next year. Elijah Corsi, injured most of the year. Put up a 10.29 ERA in just 7 innings, so obviously a very small sample size. But he is a borderline roster player for us, and he's also expected to make about $1.6 million next year. So he is a pitcher who we may look to move on from. We already talked about Ganoa. Omar Lopez is another pitcher who was injured, unfortunately, for a good chunk of the year. Was very good when he did pitch, 1.64 ERA over 11 innings, but he's fragile physically. Hopefully we can keep him healthy. Jorge Melendez, another pitcher in his mid-20s, a guy who can start for us, but was primarily a reliever this past season. 5.30 ERA in 91 2/3 innings. But looks like he can be an arm at the major league level. Andy Ochoa hopefully can be more than an arm. Don't love the fact that he's fragile, but put up a 3.79 ERA in 38 innings pitched for us this year. Definitely look at him as a potentially pretty solid arm for our bullpen. He's still viewed as the number 56 prospect in all of baseball. So hoping for more from the 23-year-old Ochoa next year. Tony Owens is the veteran of the staff. He's an extremely popular player. Probably the main reason we'll keep him around. A fan favorite. Pretty average type profile and pretty average type performance with a 4.10 ERA over 74 and 2/3 innings pitched. His arbitration number is going to look to be close to 1.7 million. But given that he's so popular and he's been more effective than Elijah Corsi, I think there's definitely more of a chance that we bring Owens back. David Villalobos was our other Rule 5 pick among our pitchers. He's a guy who we had to jump from A-ball all the way to the major leagues, and he held his own with a 4.72 ERA over 61 innings pitched. But you can see he still could improve his slider, still could improve his control, still could potentially improve his stuff. And he does, of course, at this point still have 3 option years left. So now that we've gotten through the year of keeping him on the major league roster, we'll have a decision next year whether we want to send him down to AA or AAA for a little seasoning before bringing him back up at some point in the future. But happy that we have both Arenales and Villalobos in our organization now after picking them both in the Rule 5 draft and getting through the year with them on the roster. And then Ernesto Moreno is our closer, another solid pitcher in his mid-20s, 2-6 record, but 34 saves, struck out 56 batters in 56 innings and put up a 3.54 ERA. Still somebody who also we think can get a little better. He was the Pirates' number 1 draft choice in 2032. So I like our pitching staff, quite honestly. To me, this doesn't look like a pitching staff that should be 14th in the National League in terms of runs allowed. So I think that hopefully with another year of seasoning for these players, and as we hopefully continue to get better coaching throughout our organization, particularly at the major league level, and perhaps most importantly, hopefully try to improve our team defense in the offseason, I think with a lot of these same guys on the team next year, we can, hopefully move into the top 10 in the National League in terms of the number of runs that we allow. Turning to our position players, this is an area where I think we've got some more work to do in the offseason. Finish the season with Adam Fuchs and Mario Ramos as our catchers. Fuchs should be back next year as our starter. Arbitration estimate is about $1.5 million. It was higher before he lost his job to Ramos when we brought him on board before the trade deadline. But a close to respectable major league bat with Fuchs, with a really nice glove and a really good personality, and pretty economical. So we'll have him around. Mario Ramos, who we picked up in that trade with the White Sox, is headed into free agency. Excellent defensive catcher, fan favorite. Probably going to be looking for too much money for us to bring him back, but he, did contribute a little bit with a 0.2 WAR in the limited time that he was on the Pirates. Turning to the infield, Victor Gomez was a Rule 5 pick. Had to carry him on the major league roster all year after he had never been above high A ball with the Royals, and he responded pretty well. 258 batting average, 31 homers, 94 ribbies, good for a 108 OPS plus, 105 WRC plus. Only put up 0.3 WAR because he is a brutal defensive player. Primarily was a DH for us, although he did play about 50 games at first base. Obviously want to try to minimize the amount of time that he is actually playing in the field. But with the way he hit this year, probably doesn't need any further seasoning. Weird for a player to go from A-ball to the majors, and he's always going to strike out a lot. You can see 211 strikeouts and 581 at-bats. Not the type of player I want to be building the team around, but given where the Pirates are right now, he's probably still a player who's got a roster spot for a couple years with this team until we get it better. Jose Perez is a player we picked up in a trade with Baltimore right after we took over the team. Kind of a utility outfielder and infielder for us. Played some at first base and then played left and right field for us also. .253 batting average, negative WAR. Not a particularly great defensive player, not a particularly great offensive player. Probably someone we'll be looking to move on from in the next year or two, possibly this offseason. Tony Cook, who was our fourth Rule 5 player, actually was our all-star this year, despite the fact that he ended the year with a .205 batting average and just 5 home runs. Slightly positive WAR for the year. He's got a good personality, not much of a hitter, and decent, at least in terms of his ratings defensively. He's also durable. I think he's a player who's probably on our team next year. I would definitely prefer if he were a utility infielder for us rather than our starting second baseman, but we'll have to see how things shake out in the offseason. David Gallegos was a utility infielder for us, hit .237 in 118 at-bats. Certainly has a profile where we could keep him around as a utility infielder. He's making the major league minimum. Rich Salon was our third baseman, another player who we picked up in our first offseason last year as the general manager right after we got hired. .246 batting average, 12 homers, below average player offensively, and doesn't have great range or error ratings. He played third base for us because he's got that gun of an arm and he's decent at turning double plays. He is a guy who I think we'd potentially like to move on from, would love to upgrade defensively at third base, and if we could upgrade offensively at the same time, could do it. Tony Fonseca is our starting shortstop, highest paid player who we picked up in a trade with the Royals. Very good defensively, a guy that we would like to keep around, particularly given we're trying to strengthen our defense rather than weaken our defense. But he did at the end of the season tell us that he doesn't like being on a losing team, is not sure that he can give 100% to the Pirates organization, and would prefer to be traded. So not an optimal situation with him. Giacinto Marinetti, a guy who we picked up in trade last offseason as we tried to start reworking this team. Spent most of the year in Indianapolis, but we did call him up in September. Hit just .208 in 24 at-bats. You can see he's gotten a cup of coffee over the past few seasons with Boston, Atlanta, and now the Pirates. Good personality, could definitely be a fifth outfielder for us next year, not making a lot of money. Andres Mendez is the number 27 prospect in baseball, was the Pirates' number 1 pick back in 2036. Hit .283 in AAA for us. We brought him up midway through September, and he hit .333 in 30 at-bats. Hasn't shown much power, really throughout his professional career, which is just the past couple of seasons. Still, think that he can develop a little more power, but he is likely to be on the team next year. Not a great defensive player, unfortunately, given that that's an area we need to improve, and he also doesn't have a ton of speed, but doesn't seem to have too much left to prove in the minors after hitting .288 in high A ball, .287 in double A, and .283 in triple A over the last couple of seasons. Luis Moreno, veteran player for us. He is going to be a free agent after this year, a guy we picked up in a trade with the Braves. Played pretty well for us, .287 batting average and 8 home runs over 45 games. But we'll be moving on from him. He's the type of guy that we can let go of to potentially make room for the likes of Mendez and potentially Marinetti. Also going to be looking for a lot of money and not a lot of speed and not particularly good defensively. So he did help us, be a little more respectable down the stretch this year, but we will likely be moving on from him. Arturo Rivas, left fielder, After hitting 30 home runs last year, production definitely down this year, 239 average, but just 19 home runs and only 15 fewer at-bats than the season before. Pretty average offensive profile. Another guy without a lot of speed, who's not all that good defensively. Negative WAR player on the year. And he's going to be making potentially close to $2 million in arbitration. Think that he is certainly a guy we may consider moving on from, given that we are trying to get younger, less expensive, faster, and better defensively. Jordan Owens, our center fielder, is actually pretty decent defensively. Not a great bat, but he held his own, hit .255 this year with 13 home runs, 108 OPS plus, 111 WRC plus. With that glove, if he hits that way, we'll take it all day long. Put up a 2.6 WAR this year. He's durable. He's out there every day. When I look at this team, even though we were horrible defensively, I look at Jordan Owens in center. I look at Tony Fonseca as short. I look at Fuchs and Ramos at catcher, and they're all pretty good at their positions. And even at second base, Tony Cook is not a perfect second baseman, but he's an acceptable second baseman. So it's really just, I think, perhaps upgrading from Cook, figuring out what we want to do with shortstop with Fonseca, and then maybe getting a little stronger at the corners of both the infield and outfield, and hopefully tighten up that defense a bit, and that should help our pitchers give up hopefully a lot fewer runs. And then the last outfielder is Chris Gomez. He had 18 of our stolen bases, really the only speedy player that we have at all. Better defensively than our other corner outfielders, but certainly not great. He kind of started the year as our first baseman and then kind of migrated into an outfield role over time. He is still going to be making the major league minimum next year. Has a decent bat, although he only hit .205 this year. He did hit 20 home runs, but was, I guess I should say, looking at his ratings, you can make an argument that he's got a decent bat, average contact, average gap power, plus home run power, decent eye. But he certainly hasn't demonstrated that he's a real good hitter at the major league level at this point. You look at his career batting stats, .220 batting average, .672 OPS, good for an 83 OPS plus, 82 WRC plus. Would certainly prefer if he was a kind of fourth outfielder for us when all is said and done next season. But given that he is durable, he's making the major league minimum, he's not horrible defensively, and he's actually one of the only players on our team with any speed, probably is somebody that we will want to bring back next year. So that is a look at both our pitchers and our everyday position players now. Certainly not a championship roster, so we've got a lot of work to do as the offseason begins, but we've got to also get through the playoffs and find out who the world champions are before the offseason really begins. And we made it to the league championship series. You can see the Yankees picked off our former team, the Kansas City Royals, so another year of having the best record in baseball for the Royals, but a disappointing finish to the season to get knocked out in the division series. So we've got a classic ALCS between the Yankees and the Red Sox, and the Padres and the Reds will be facing off in the National League Championship Series. And we're on to the World Series, where the Yankees in the American League picked off the defending world champion Red Sox, and they will be going up against the San Diego Padres. So a rematch of the 1998 World Series here between the Yankees and the Padres. And the New York Yankees are your 2038 world champions. It was a crazy series. The home team did not win a single game. The Yankees took the first two in San Diego to go up 2-0. San Diego then won 3 straight in New York, and then they went back to San Diego with a 3-2 lead, and the Yankees won games 6 and 7 on the road in San Diego to clinch a crazy World Series. So we've made it to the off season. Let's see how we did. Fans not happy with our record. Did a good job increasing attendance. Did a good job dumping a high-priced player. Bob Nutting, very happy with our performance and accomplishing the goals he's given us. Wants us to get close to 500 next year, improve our batting average, increase attendance, and wants us to make the playoffs in the next couple of years. So the pressure is ratcheted up a new level. Did get a small increase to our budget. I think we were at $114 million before, so a $8 million budget increase. So it's a step in the right direction. He's extended our contract for 4 years at $1.3 million a year, so we've got a little bit of job security now. We are moving on from our hitting coach, our manager, and our assistant GM. Talked about the manager situation a little bit in our last episode. We had promoted Tony Thomas from bench coach to manager. He was looking for a ton of money, and we felt like with our current bench coach, we had a replacement for him. And we also have an excellent replacement in AAA for hitting coach Atsushi Kinagawa. So we're going to move on from both of them. And you can see we've also lost a number of other minor league coaches. We kind of chose for all of these guys to let their contracts expire. We'll obviously look in the coming days to hopefully improve our coaching staff throughout the organization now that we've got a full offseason ahead of us. Top prospects in baseball, Isaiah Hill and Luis Longoria, two of the top 10 prospects in baseball in our Pirate system. Hill, you may remember we did have him move from high A ball to double A to triple A at the end of last season. Struggled a bit at the triple A level, hitting just 208 and 72 at-bats. He is a player with some speed. He is a player with a little range in the outfield. Certainly checks some of the boxes for what we're looking for. As we talked about, the number 6 prospect in baseball. Looks like he can be a pretty good hitter, but he's not going to walk a ton, and he's going to strike out a decent amount. But still, will be an additive player for our team. Just a matter of whether he's up with us at the end of March when spring training breaks, or we let him spend some time in AAA for seasoning next year. And then Luis Longoria is definitely farther away. Unfortunately, pitched just 3 games in rookie ball this last year, was effective, then was out with a torn labrum, still recovering from that for another 3 months. He was the Pirates' number 1 pick in 2035. Certainly profiles as someone who could be a very good pitcher. He is, however, now closing in on 21 years old, coming off of a torn labrum, and doesn't have the greatest personality in the world, and he's still got a lot of work to do to kind of develop some of those skills. So hopefully our higher levels of investment in player development, and then, as I talked about, adding hopefully some better coaches throughout our system will help a player like Longoria develop a little more rapidly over the next few years. So as the offseason begins, our plan is to promote bench coach Fidel Almario to manager. Excellent with development, good with mechanics, outstanding with aging. He is only average with his player relationships right now, particularly struggles with the pitchers, but we are going to give him a chance. So we are going to appoint him as our manager. And as I talked about, we have hitting coach Ian Paxton down in Indianapolis, who we signed last year to a 2-year deal. We recently signed him to a 5-year extension. He is an excellent hitting coach, outstanding at teaching hitting, outstanding at development, average with mechanics, legendary with handling aging. He'll fit in well personality-wise with the folks we have at the major league level. And he'll also be for the next 6 seasons, because we signed him to an extension when he was down in AAA, a pretty economical hitting coach for these Pirates at the major league level. So Paxton, we are going to see if we can appoint him as our hitting coach, and he has taken the job. So now we just need to find a new bench coach, which we may have in our organization. And then you can see we have several vacancies at manager, pitching coach, hitting coach, etc. throughout our minor league organization. So going to work on hopefully hiring some more quality coaches for our system. We're getting ready to make some arbitration offers, but also kind of looking at the trade market. And I had mentioned that probably was time to move on from our third baseman, Rich Salon. Just don't think he's good enough defensively, and also really not much of a hitter. And we can actually get some cash back from Miami, in addition to Ishmael Heel, who is a pretty good defensive catcher, not much of a hitter, but he hasn't been disastrous at the major league level with a 74 OPS plus, 73 WRC plus. He's been a positive WAR player. He's headed into arbitration. He's probably going to make about $1.8 million. But I think that if we bring him on board with Heel and Fuchs, we've got a really good defensive tandem for catcher without having to spend a ton of money and without having to chase after somebody older in free agency. So particularly given that the Marlins are going to also throw in some cash for us, we are going to go ahead and make that deal. And catcher is at least one position that we shouldn't have to do anything with this offseason. And as we prepare for salary arbitration, a lot of those young starting pitchers that we mentioned in their mid-20s are all headed for their first years of arbitration. The amount of money they're making right now is not crazy, so we may even see if any of them are interested in perhaps signing up to a longer deal, buying out a year or two of potential free agency. Relievers a little less exciting. Corsi we're probably going to move on from. Melendez and Owens are both pretty popular players, so probably will be inclined to keep them around another year. Fuchs and Heel we're going to sign, and that'll be our catching tandem. And then Arturo Rivas, talked about him. He's been a starter, obviously, for the last 3 years in Pittsburgh. Has a decent power bat, but not a lot of speed, not that good defensively, and doesn't hit for much of an average. He's also going to turn 30 next year. And the amount of money he's looking for, $1.9 million, isn't crazy, but I just think we want to get more athletic in terms of better defense and more speed, even with our corner outfielders. So with Mendez likely coming up to take one spot, and Owens in center field, kind of want to keep one of those other corner outfield spots open for potentially adding someone through trade or free agency who may be a little better than Rivas, because we do potentially have money to spend in free agency this year. We're not going to go spend $25 million on one player, but if we can spread it out among 2 or 3 different guys, maybe an outfielder, maybe either a second baseman or a third baseman, and then maybe another arm for the pitching staff. That might be how we end up trying to spend some money in free agency this coming off season. And we pieced together another trade. We're going to get to bring on Ignacio Carvajal, a center fielder who you can see has won a bunch of gold gloves. Very good defensively, obviously, with the gold gloves. Has some speed, which we don't have a lot of on our team. Not much of a bat, but he can kind of hold his own, 260 type hitter. I'm thinking of him as a 4th or 5th outfielder. It's very conceivable that our manager will start him in center field over Gomez, which is fine because Gomez isn't really a great hitter either. But he's also good defensively. But in our effort to kind of add some speed and add some defense to the team, he's only got 1 year after this year remaining on his contract, and he's actually making a lot of money. But if we send a package of pretty useful players over to Washington, they'll actually retain that contract for next year. And Alex Simmons is a guy that we traded for from the Royals. had a soft spot for a lot of Royals, as you know. Didn't pitch all that well with us in the majors, although he was very good in 2037 when he made his debut with the Royals. But his movement and control aren't great, doesn't have the best personality, so don't mind moving on from him. And then the other three players we're going to pass on: Daniel Piccina, spent most of this year in Indianapolis, but has been up with the big club for the last several seasons. Just don't think he's ever going to hit that much at the major league level. Jose Perez was up this entire year, picked him up in a trade with Baltimore. No speed, not that great defensively. And then Giacinto Marinetti, who we brought up at the end of the season, has had some major league time. Again, not that great a defensive player, not a lot of speed. Does have a decent bat, hate to give him up. But Piccina, Perez, and Marinetti are also all players who are out of options. So we're not going to be able to get him down to AAA unless we clear waivers with them. Don't necessarily want their $700,000 a year major league minimum contracts to be guaranteed. And I don't think any of them are really in our long-term plans for kind of some of the reasons that I just mentioned. So if we can package a bunch of guys that aren't really in our long-term plans and will allow us to get money off the books, and we can bring on a guy for a season until some more of our young players are available, who's got some speed and is very good defensively. As I said, could end up our starting center fielder, even though I'm envisioning him as a great utility outfielder who can be a glove in the late innings of the games that we happen to be ahead of, and kind of help our defense and help our team's speed. I think it makes sense to try to bring him on board for these four guys, so we are going to go ahead and do that trade as well. And you can see getting rid of all those guys who did have major league contracts that we didn't necessarily want to keep on the major league roster has cleared up some more potential money for us as we get closer to free agency that we can use to bring players on board, or we can also use to bolster our scouting and development budgets. And in an effort to continue freeing up money, we've got another deal set. Arturo Rivas, who, as we've talked about, is eligible for arbitration, as is Elijah Corsi. Don't really want to pay either of them and bring them back. We can get a tiny bit of cash from the Cardinals, as well as shortstop Mario Jimenez. He's just a good personality to have in the minor league system. Good defensive player, got some speed. Don't think that he's ever going to be a major league player. But we're getting a tiny bit of cash, and we're getting someone who's going to be another good personality and influence throughout our minor league system for a couple of guys that we really just want to get off the books at this point. So we're going to go ahead and complete that trade as well. We'll go ahead and assign Jimenez to AA tentatively, but obviously that's all subject to change when we really start working through our farm system later on this offseason. And we've got another trade. Have to give up Mike Piedra, who is a left-handed pitching prospect. Don't think he's ever going to really materialize into much of anything. But then also Jorge Melendez, who is a extremely popular player, headed to arbitration, expected to make about $1.3 million. He's a fan favorite, so this isn't going to be popular if we get rid of him. I just don't think he's really all that good a pitcher. He's been in the majors for parts of 4 seasons now, and he's bounced around from team to team, but put up an 80 ERA plus, 129 FIP minus, and a minus 1.8 WAR over the course of his career. So even though he's popular, I don't know that I want to be spending money on him. We'll take a hit to fan interest, I'm sure, by moving on from him, but I just don't think he's all that good a player, and we've got money potentially this offseason if we need to find a somewhat popular reliever who's on the market, I think we can find a somewhat popular reliever who's better than Melendez for our team. And in return, we'll get Jim Kager, who is a third baseman from the Orioles. Profiles as an average-ish offensive player, but he's definitely an upgrade defensively at third base for us. He's durable. He can go out there every day. His arbitration number is about $3.5 million, so he's probably not a long-term answer for us because he's going to start getting, I think, a little too expensive for us. But he's been in the majors for 4 years now. You can see he's been close to a league average offensive player. He was an all-star once. Can put up 15 to 25 homers a year. And again, most importantly, to kind of just upgrade our defense. I think in a perfect world, I'd love to have him as a utility infielder. I think realistically next year, he's probably our starting third baseman. Not the best answer in the world, but if we can get him locked up for about $3.5 million, that'll kind of mean that we're headed into free agency with the ability to really kind of bring on a decent contract for a second baseman. And the issue is that there's not any great second baseman out there, which I haven't shown you yet. But I just want as much, I want to have to fill as few positions as possible this offseason, and I want as many resources as possible in terms of money to be able to kind of bring on some players. We may end up having to go back to the trade market, but I'm sure it'll be expensive to bring on a good second baseman, particularly if they're younger. But for a guy we kind of want to get rid of and a guy that doesn't have a lot of value, bringing on a guy who could be our starting third baseman next year for not a ton of money, I think makes sense. So we're going to go ahead and complete the trade to bring on Kager also. Fans not happy, as we knew that Melendez is gone. Took a couple point hit to fan interest. Not the worst thing in the world, but certainly not the best thing in the world either. That gives us another player in the case of Kager that we're going to have to figure out what to do in arbitration. But you can see at this point we've got offers out to everyone we have left. So at this point we've traded away all the players that we didn't want to make an arbitration offer to. Kager, they think the number's about 3.6. Hopefully we can lock him up for... he doesn't really want to talk, so he must not be happy that he was sent to Pittsburgh. All right, so we will just go ahead and put a $3.6 million offer out there for him and hope that we can get him locked up if we have to go through arbitration, at least for the next season. And got some good news with our coaching staff. Jean Vasquez is going to join us as our bench coach. You can see he's legendary with development, decent with mechanics, outstanding with aging, good reputation, and is expected to have average relationships with the guys on the team. He's also outstanding at teaching running and pretty good at catching infield and outfield defense, so good to add him to the staff from that perspective. Also fits in well with everyone on the team. So right now we're happy in terms of our staff cohesion. You can see we've got some real good instructors now between our first and third base coaches and our bench coach. So we're pretty much all set at the major league level. Still working on kind of rounding out the minor league pitching coaches primarily. We've got a few holes that we got to still work on filling there. So starting to get some of the arbitration eligible players signed. Tony Owens, who is popular, signed the deal, so that helps with the fans. Ishmael Heel, the catcher. Marco Estrada, Ricky Gotti, Edgar Flores, and Heriberto Rosales, who are all starting pitchers. Manager Joe Gaetti for our minor league system. Colton Schmidt and Blake Hauser still in negotiations with both of them. Hauser doesn't seem like we're going to get signed. And Ryan Rippey, also looking to get him to join our minor league system, but not sure that we're going to get him on board either. But making some progress here on Halloween 2038. Basically just waiting to hear from Fuchs among the arbitration eligible players. And then we may have to go to arbitration with Jim Kager since he doesn't seem interested in talking about a deal with us since we picked him up in that trade with the Orioles. And we now have Adam Fuchs signed up, hitting coach Ryan Garvey for the Miners. Still struggling to get a final pitching coach into our system. Keep having players who say they like our offers and then say that they've got better offers, but we're making progress. At this point, we'll re-engage with Kager maybe in a few days just to see if we can get him signed before having to go to arbitration. If not, we'll deal with it then. We're going to have money for free agents, as I talked about. It doesn't look like it's going to be an incredible free agent class, so we're actually going to make sure that we give a little bump to our scouting budget and a slightly bigger bump to our player development budget while we're thinking about it. We're going to keep tickets at $13, which is higher than the $12 that we had when we were selling season tickets last year. Hopefully we'll pick up a few players to give us a little fan interest boost and help us on the field, and still be able to sell more season tickets than last year, even though our price is going to be a little bit higher. Last but not least, on player development, we can drop our draft budget a little bit for the time being. That could certainly change depending on where we end up in the draft lottery. But that opens up a little bit of the money that we just put into scouting and development, still keeps us with a decent budget for potential free agents and taking on some contracts going forward, while most importantly continuing to invest basically half of the $8 million that we got in increased budget for this year, put $1 into scouting, $3 into player development. So we are putting half of the money that we got in an enhanced budget into kind of long-term development of the team and scouting and development, rather than in signing players for this upcoming season. Although we want to get competitive on the field as soon as we possibly can, we're not thinking that we're a playoff team next year, so would rather kind of continue investing money into this farm system that has a lot of really highly drafted prospects in it, because Pittsburgh's been such a bad team for so many years now. And we finally, after a lot of going back and forth with pitching coaches, finally have a complete pitching staff through the minors and the majors for next year. So one small thing off of the list. We are getting close here on November 8th to the arbitration date, so we're going to try to re-engage with Jim Kager now that he's had a week and a half to deal with the reality that he's been sent to Pittsburgh. Still doesn't really want to talk to us, so we will just let the $3.6 million we offered stand as it is in arbitration, and hopefully we'll win the case against him. Getting close to the end of this episode. We've made a number of trades. We've got just about everyone arbitration eligible signed. We've kind of revamped our coaching staff a bit. I'm going to have a new, as we talked about, a new manager, a new bench coach, and a new hitting coach at the major league level for this upcoming season. So some pretty significant changes there. And not surprisingly, no awards for the Pirates thus far through award season, but Victor Gomez, the Rule 5 acquisition, did actually finish second in the Rookie of the Year voting. Remember, he led the team with 31 homers, 94 ribbies. Not much of a defensive player, but still a bat that has proven to be useful at the major league level. He lost to David Lowry of the Cubs, former first-round draft choice for them, who hit .326, playing second base. Not nearly the power that we had with Gomez, but certainly that .326 batting average is pretty impressive. And it's unfortunate that we had to go to arbitration with Jim Kager, but at least we won the case. Our 3.6 million number was viewed as better than his 4.25 million number, so we do have him hopefully locked up to be our third baseman next season. So as we get close to free agency filings, we are going to potentially have some money to spend to add some talent on our team this offseason. I could see pitcher being a spot. I could see us looking for a good corner outfielder. And I could see us still looking for a second baseman and perhaps even a third baseman to start over Kager if we decide to move him into a super utility kind of role. So definitely spots that we will be looking to fill. And, we'll find out in a day or two, or we'll find out tomorrow exactly who is going to be available as a free agent. So looking forward to seeing who's available, and we'll give ourselves something to think about at the end of this episode, and then we'll come back in our next episode and dig deep into free agency. International free agents. Take a quick look at these gentlemen. Doesn't look like there's anyone to go crazy chasing after. Ramon Almonte is a nice glove, although it looks like he's already signed with the Mets organization. So they got on him quickly. Texas wants to send us a corner outfielder who's pretty good defensively, has some speed. He's wrecked physically, and he's making pretty big money. He's been a close to average-ish offensive player over the course of his career. Bringing on someone with speed who's good defensively wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. He actually won a Gold Glove back in 2032. Doesn't have the best personality with that low leadership and low work ethic. They're looking for Chris Gomez, who is potentially someone who's still in the mix at third base and first base for us, even though he became more of a corner outfielder last season, but don't really want to give him up. And they're also looking for Tony Estrada, who's a good personality, but not really ever going to be a major league player, but don't really want to take on Oscar Enciso's contract there. The top free agents out there, there is a second baseman, Khalil Watson. I'm sure he's going to be looking for a ton of money. Wouldn't be the worst player to bring on. He's wrecked physically, looking for money that we could afford. We're not going to make a long-term commitment to him, but if we could get him for 1 year, maybe not the worst thing in the world. He could definitely be a third baseman for us too. So he's out there. Agustin Herrera, left-handed starting pitcher. I think he's going to be too expensive for us. Yeah, it looks like he's looking for $26 million. Would love to have him on the staff, but that's not going to happen. Right-hander Jorge Abreu, excellent profile for a relief pitcher and has been pretty effective, as you can see. Looking for $15 million. That's not going to happen for the Pirates. Veteran Julio Rodriguez, too expensive for the Pirates. Alejandro Osuna, too expensive for the Pirates. Left-handed closer David Galdeano, coming off of a torn rotator cuff, too expensive for the Pirates. Yerald Nin, way too expensive for the Pirates, although would fill our hole at second base. Ray Woolsey, left-hander, $17 million, too expensive for the Pirates. Christian Hernandez, $15 million, too expensive for the Pirates. And Fernando Tatis Jr., didn't even need to look at it to know that he will be too expensive for the Pirates. He has had a insane career, as you can see by all the hardware stacked up behind him. It's kind of sad, I guess, to see him performing at the level that he did perform the last couple years, where he's hit 225 and 224. His career batting average now down to 290, but 889 home runs, 2,217 runs driven in. Certainly one of the all-time great careers here for Fernando Tatis Jr. So taking a broader look at the batters who are available, Manny Vela, the brilliant shortstop from Boston, looks like he might have had some injury issues last year, but incredible glove, excellent bat, great personality. Looking for over $40 million a year. It'd be nice to dream about having a player like that on our team, but it's not going to happen. There's a few other players out there that maybe can help fill a hole on our team, so we'll do some investigation there. Looking at the pitchers, as you would expect, there's a ton of decent looking pitchers, at least by the star ratings, potentially available. When you kind of try looking at the starting pitchers, the class is a lot smaller. Bobby Gonzalez, $1.7 million. He's an Iron Man. What's the deal there? Iron Man. He wants to be a starter. I think he'd be more effective as a closer, but he did go 19-5 for the Red Sox with a 3.35 ERA in 2037 when they won the World Series. So I probably shouldn't be too judgmental. Definitely been an above average pitcher over the course of his career, although he's coming off of an off year last season. According to our scouts, he hasn't really dropped off the map materially. I think we're going to throw it. He's a left-hander. Pretty effective against both righties and lefties, but even better against lefties. The amount he's looking for just seems too low. I'm guessing it's going to say it says impossible because he just has no interest in signing with the Pirates. But we'll at least see. Yeah. And that's why he's impossible, because he doesn't want to play for our new manager. So Fidel El Mario, winning friends and influencing people. Would have been nice to bring on a pitcher like Bobby Gonzalez for not a ton of money. But we will. Ooh, and Caleb Lagerwell, our old friend. I might have to bring him on board. Oh, he's fragile now. He still was respectable last year with Kansas City, 11-10, 4.54 ERA, but below average in terms of his ERA plus and his FIP minus. Probably the highest SIERA of his career, probably the lowest WAR of his career. It says that it's impossible for us to sign him. I'm guessing that our manager may be kind of a jerk. Yeah, it seems like a lot of people don't want to play with our new manager, so that could be a problem. I guess the only positive thing is that we don't have a ton of money invested in him. We're only paying him $150,000 a year, so we could potentially just fire him before he's ever managed a game for us and move Jan Vasquez, who we just brought on board to be our bench coach, into that manager role. He's expected to have good relationships with the Pirates players. He's got a normal personality, works well with personable. Although El Mario is a normal personality also, works well with easygoing, doesn't have as good relationships. Should we try to swap them? If we appoint him as manager, Yeah, Fidel Almario is not interested in being our bench coach. Not surprising. Well, we're going to have to give that some thought. We'll give that some thought between now and our next episode. But I don't love seeing that a lot of people don't really want to have anything to do with our manager. It seems like it's mostly pitchers, though, because you look at the batters here and not seeing anyone who's impossible to sign. But a lot of pitchers really don't like this guy. Interesting. We don't have to go crazy bringing on pitchers. As I've talked about, I kind of like the pitchers in our system. I like our starters especially. They're all in their mid-20s, and I think they all have pretty good potential. But the fact that our manager just doesn't get along with pitchers, and I did, kind of see this when I moved him up. I didn't really think about it all that deeply. But it seems like he's just kind of a jerk to the pitchers, and nobody wants to play with him, play for him. And Vasquez has a much more balanced relationship and good relationships overall. This is probably a funky decision, but we are going to... I'm going to wait till the next episode, but I'm leaning towards firing Almario before he's ever managed a game for us, promoting Vasquez to manager, and then going out and looking for a bench coach. But I'm going to give it a little more thought before our next episode. So we will be digging into the Palace intrigue as far as our coaching staff and digging deep into the free agent market in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.